The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Fernando, hi. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to talk to you about wine, especially because you are teaching a case study about Georgian wine at IE University in Spain.
Thank you, Georgy, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to meet you here.
Fernando, the first question I'd like to ask you is about wine exports, because wine for Georgians and for Georgia has a very important cultural heritage, historical significance. But apart from that, it's also very important for us economically. Last year, we exported around 259 million USD worth of wine, which is roughly 4.25% of the total export of the country. So wine is pretty significant, and it's growing basically every year. In the last decade, wine export over almost doubled in share. Based on that, I'd like to ask you about Russia, because now over 65% of Georgian wine in 2023 was exported to Russia, which has its own specificities when it comes to wine. I'd like to ask you, how big of a threat, if you think it's a threat for export, for 65%, the majority of export, be focused on one country such as Russia?
Thank you for asking that question, because this is precisely one of the challenges that we tackle in the case was of Georgia. 4 or 5 years ago, when we wrote the case, almost more than 80% of the wine exports were going to Russia. And one of the conclusions was we have to diversify away in order to decrease the exposure and vulnerabilities to the Russian market. You are a small fish, they are a big fish. They can cut you out, and they will not suffer because they will be in a position to replace the wine imports from other countries, but you will suffer a lot because you are highly concentrated on that. So one of the conclusions and one of the recommendations is the Georgian wine industry needs to diversify away from the traditional markets, because not only Russia concentrates a high proportion, but due to historical reasons, I would say that more than 95% of wine exports were concentrated in countries related to the former Soviet sphere, so to speak, like Ukraine. And this is a risk. And this is why you need to look for newer markets and for newer types of wines, and you need to sell them at higher prices.
One of the ways of diversifying Georgian exports is to export to the EU. We also export to the US. China and Japan are also becoming very interesting, but money-wise, numbers-wise, those three markets are not that big. In terms of EU, we exported around 30 million USD worth of wine last year, which is almost triple of the exports 10 years ago. So we do see a drastic trend, a drastic increase, but still the numbers are nowhere close to the numbers that we see in terms of exports to Russia. In your opinion, what should Georgian winemakers do to appeal more to European market?
Well, you have to do, in my view, this is something we're going to discuss with wine growers. There are like 3 or 4 viable alternatives. And this is let's say, you can escalate this over a period of several years. In the short run, there is no other chance than keeping exporting to Russia with a value for money proposition, because it's still your cash cow and you are generating steady cash flows from Russia. What should the industry do? Of course, invest in improving the production facilities, invest in developing new distribution channels, and investing in developing new type of products. And this is where the different options appear on the table. One alternative could be to export the same type of wines, Western taste type of wines, to the European Union countries and even to the United Kingdom, which is the largest net imported on earth, with the same value proposition. Even the United States. Let's say, I'm not going to be able to sell a bottle of Georgian wine at 100 euros because you don't have the brand image that is going to allow you to do so. If you are a French wine producer, you could do that. So one alternative is go in the short run to Europe and the United States and even to China with the value proposition of we are the cradle of wine, we have unique grape varieties, our wines are different, but still we sell a very good wine at a decent price level. The alternative number one. Alternative number two, tackle traditional markets, let's imagine Russia, and tell the younger consumers, wait a minute, Georgia has changed. During the Soviet times, Georgia was focused on quantity, not quality. We had 150,000 hectares under vineyards. Today we have 50,000 hectares. And because of that, the Georgian wine that you sell or that you buy today has nothing to do with the Georgian wine that your grandparents used to drink. So this is the idea of increasing the price per liter, but the advantage of doing that is that you have already the channels in place. The disadvantage is that you have to educate the consumers that the Georgian wine has changed, and this still doesn't reduce the exposure to the vulnerabilities you could get from being exposed to the Russian market. And the third alternative, which is only viable in the long run, is to bet on very high quality, very high price, becoming a niche type of producer. But this will require generous, sustained investments in marketing over years to position Georgian wines as radically different. And you could produce two types of wines. Western type of wines, let's say like the typical traditional French, Italian, Spanish wine, but positioning yourself at the very high price level, following the strategies of countries like New Zealand and to a lesser extent Argentina and Chile in the niche markets. Or you should bet for something that makes you unique, which is the query wines. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing that correctly, the so-called amber wines. Yeah? And these, I feel that they are the four alternatives you have. One, in the short run, do business as usual, and then continue to explore traditional markets with new value propositions and open markets in Europe and the US and perhaps China with these other two alternatives.
Do you think that these alternatives that you mentioned have to be implemented all at once, or the country and winemakers should focus on any particular of them?
I believe in a gradual approach, in a multi-stage gradual approach. And again, there is nothing such as only one strategy for Georgia, because in the end, it's not going to be Georgia, but Georgian wineries and wine producers who are going to choose to play in one way or the other. Yeah? For sure, what I would like to see more, and this is beyond politics, I am not familiar, I am not interested in jumping into Georgian politics, but this should be an affaire d'etat, a matter of state. Beyond who is running the government, there should be a policy, a long-run strategy through which the government would support the Georgian wine industry as a whole to go through these different stages of export. Large wineries, you have some large wineries, already can play the game of exporting your current wines in Europe. Value for money, you have to invest in finding distributors, that's it. But small wineries who have niche products, small productions, they can begin to play the game of, let's say, quality wines at 150 euros a bottle, tackling or attacking only the experts, the knowers, the connoisseurs. But this would imply a long-term strategy of marketing, education, marketing investments. And in my view, I don't know whether there are so many wineries that can play that game. And in that case, the government should implement a policy with clear export-related objectives in order to make this happen.
What are some of the trends that you see on the European market that could be used by the Georgian winemakers to somehow appeal more to the customers there?
This is an excellent, complex question. Thank you for asking that. One of the trends is that wine consumption and wine production is slowly but steadily decreasing year after year. And therefore, the only way to survive in Europe is to differentiate your value proposition. On global basis, there are 100 million hectoliters being sold, yeah? And this generates something like 36 billion euros. This is the big C. When you think that Georgian wines are just 1 million hectoliters, you have less than 1% of the global export market. And if you think, as you mentioned, that you are selling $260 million, every bottle is sold around 2.5, 2.4 euros per liter, when the average is 3.6. So, given that Georgia is a small player, becoming a niche supplier or a niche exporter, it is very intelligent. And what would be your unique sales proposition? You should adopt as the baseline Georgia, the cradle of winemaking. And this is why the title of our case, and I will send you a copy, it is Wines of Georgia, Marketing the Cradle of Wine. Not many people know about that. And buyers would be interested in tasting your wines if they are special enough. Given that you have more than 525 accepted grape varieties, most of them endemic to Georgia, you have room to sell differentiated wines, not only in quality, but also in terms of tastes. And I feel that this is the name of the game that Georgian wine producers should play. Because the market, to finish the answer to your question, only one word is premiumization. What does it mean? 20 years ago, the average price per liter paid in international wines would be around 2 euros. Today it's close to 4. And even though global consumption is falling, the proportion of wines coming from international origins is going up. Consumers are willing to pay more expensive amounts of money to taste different things. And from that viewpoint, Georgia has an opportunity. Another trend that fits very well with the query type of wine, it is organic, natural wines. There is nothing more natural, nothing more organic than a query wine. And because of that, you have an opportunity to exploit there. But again, this will take time, patience, drive, and money.
In terms of Georgian wines, what people usually mention is red wines. You know, Saperavi, Kinzmarauli, Usakhelauri also, which is a very unique wine from Raja region. But you know, we also produce a lot of white wines, and actually the white wine production is way higher than the red wine production in Georgia. What could be done to target white wine market as well? You know, white Qvevri wines and also amber wines, maybe. Why not? What could be done so that you know, we sell red wines? Okay, but we also sell way more white wines.
I mean, I wouldn't be so worried about what type of wine. Remember that you can produce red wines or white wines depending on how you process the skin of the grape. It is not that you can produce only white wines. But I feel that the real opportunity for Georgia again is to exploit this idea of 525 different grape varieties. Even you can produce very special wines from very special plots, and still there would be a niche to be untapped. How is it that the amber wine is unique to Georgia? And given that you have this at the UNESCO heritage or part of cultural heritage, this is another label that you could put to the wines that you are going to export. We still feel that the problem you have is that this production of amber wines, of quality wines, is limited by the number of queries. You should, and the people who know how to produce the queries are dying. So the first thing you should do, and I feel that there are efforts going into that direction, you should create like a school for craftsmanship or for craftsmen to teach how young kids, young generations, how to produce the queries in order to sell query wines. You know what? Because no one is going to be able to compete with you on that particular niche. You are protected by this UNESCO thing, cultural thing, and if it is true that premiumization and internationalization are the two key words for the name of the game, you cannot produce 100 billion bottles. Your productions will be still limited to small amounts of bottles, and this is what you should play. A small number of bottles from very particular, peculiar regions, exporting and selling them at very high price. You need to build a story around the quality wines. Don't forget that 3/4 of your production comes from Cajete. But then you have going to talk about the quality wines, you have the Cajete, but you also have the Mereti. And you have these rivalries. People don't know where Georgia is. Sorry. You need to build a brand Georgia around the wine. And the idea that you are the cradle of wine gives you a unique, differentiated point to position Georgian wines abroad.
Fernando, let me ask you a last question. We touched upon the case study several times.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you about how did the idea came about, and why did you decide to teach the history and the economics of Georgian wine at IE University?
Okay. At the IE, because you know the school from inside, we have people from more than 140 nationalities on campus. Not every year, but we have students from different origins. I am a passionate about wine. And at the IE, we teach cases of well-established brands, because there are many cases written. And I always, when I discuss different cases, when we discuss wine-related cases, I ask the same question to the students. Do you know where is the land of the origin of wine? And no one answers. Yeah? And it happened that I made this question in a group where I had Georgian students. And they got mad at this, I mean positively. They said, something is the first time that the person knows that Georgia is the country of origin of wine. And then they came to me and said, why don't you write a case? I said, listen, I don't have time to write cases. But then they convinced me, 5 students, and this should be grateful because private initiative is also important. During the COVID, they phoned me and said, Professor, you are locked, right? And they began to laugh because they knew that I was locked. Yeah, now what are you going to do? Can you write the case on Georgian wines? And we made some arrangements, and it took me more than 2 months, because writing a case, it's a big job. You know what a case is. It's like a little novel between 10 and 20 pages. So collecting the information, filtering the data, write something that makes sense, it's a lot of a job. So it took me 2 full months to write the case. And then we presented the case right after the COVID crisis ended up, during the 30th anniversary of the independence of Georgia, and that it was in May 2021 at the IE. And we had the presence of the General Secretary of the WTO, the World Touristic Organization, who sits in Madrid and who's a Georgian. And then we got the visit of the Minister of Agriculture. We had the presence of several ambassadors during the visit of your President or Prime Minister to Spain. So it was a public event, and everyone was happy. And at least right now, per year, at least 400 students in 3 countries in 2 different continents, because I teach this case at the Catholic University of Chile, in Chile and in Guatemala. I teach this case twice a year in 2 business schools in Portugal, which is a well-known wine producer country. And of course, I teach this at the IE in Spain. So I feel that from a marketing viewpoint, you should invest more as a country, not only in writing cases, but educating consumers that Georgia is the cradle of wine.
Fernando, thank you very much for the interview and the job you're doing to raise the awareness and basically creating the brand for Georgian wine in Spain and all the other countries you mentioned.
Thank you very much.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.